Good morning, everybody. I am so excited for this panel that we're having today. As you know, this is the third of our WORxK Round Table Series, and today we are discussing BIPOC communities, empowering BIPOC communities, and fostering a culture of belonging and equity. My name is Dr. Kristy Taylor. I'm a career coach and the founder of Work Solutions LLC. I'm going to serve as your host today. I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Dr. Kristy Dinkins.
Good morning, everybody. So happy to have you all here today. Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor. You know, Christy's, we're going to do it, okay?
That's right, girl.
But definitely enjoying being a part of this process. We have a wonderful, wonderful time. We're going to have a wonderful time together today to have a wonderful conversation, an extensive conversation about BIPOC communities. I always have an issue saying that word, BIPOC communities, and ways to foster belonging and ways to kind of get us together. So I'm excited. I'm really excited. Thank you so much for having me, Kristy.
I'm really excited to co-host this with you. So if you don't know what BIPOC stands for, it's Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And we have so many experts. We have some great conversation planned for you. I'm going to just start with a quick around the room and have Alex introduce himself, and then we'll keep going with the conversation.
Hey, great morning, everyone. Alex Dumas here, Vice President of BIPOC Coach Collective. I'm a keynote speaker, international best-selling author, and head coach of the Black Executive Men community. That's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Alex. Kerry? Kerry on silent. You on mute?
All right, let's do it again. Good morning. I am Dr. Kerry Mitchell-Brown, Equity Strategist and Cultural Architect. I'm so excited to be here, part of this conversation. I'm also the founder of a KMB Consultancy.
Thank you so much. Shanandiss.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on this platform today. So my name again is Shanandiss, and I'm the author of a newly released collaborative poetry book and also the co-founder of Nexodus.
Thank you so much. Tamuri.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Tamuri Richardson, and I am CEO and founder of T. Leanne Speaking Prose. I'm an international motivational speaker, 4-time international best-selling author, and president and CEO of Solano County Black Chamber of Commerce, which is one of the largest chambers in Northern California. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, you go, girl. I love that. And last but not least, Jaketra.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Jaketra Bryant, and I am a diversity and inclusion strategist and licensed professional counselor. And I am the founder of Dr. Jaketra Bryant Coaching and Speaking LLC. And I do speaking and leadership training and professional counseling and all the above. So glad to be here.
Wow, I'm so excited to be in a room with all of this Black excellence today. And so we're going to kick off this conversation with Jaketra. And so Jaketra, as a diversity and strategic leadership coach, you know, what are some effective strategies that you found or seen in fostering a sense of belonging? Because that's what these discussions are all about. So when it comes to fostering belonging and equity within the BIPOC community, especially in corporate settings, because we at Work Solutions, we focus a lot on workplace resiliency, right? And so what has been your experience and background?
Yes. You know how we're always hearing, make room, make space, create space for conversations. And I believe just that. I think although we may say things like, let's create space, let's have talks such as this, let's have professional development, it's not happening. And I think, and the people that need to be in the room are not in the room. And so the strategy, I still go old school with that. Create the room, create the space, have the platform for it, and keep having discussions that center around what's happening, not shy away from it. And so I know a lot of people, it's pretty uncomfortable talking about biases, it's talking about race, talking about color, talking about discrimination, using the word race, using the word racism, prejudice, discrimination, all of those things. To be honest, we shy away from it. So the strategy is being able to have a space and creating the room where we can indeed discuss those things and feel as if there is no repercussions for us saying, I felt uncomfortable in this space, or I felt uncomfortable to discuss this topic to this HR person. And so having the particular people in place, such as training, professionals who can come in and maybe start off conversations. And I think sometimes we go to professional developments, we may do online workshops, and then it's but the people within the room are uncomfortable themselves discussing topics such as BIPOC communities and discriminatory actions and what's actually going on. And so being able to literally go back to the basics, go back to the carpet when we were like as kids. I'm thinking like literally in my vision now when we're as kids and we're on the kindergarten carpet and we're like, let's learn our ABCs. Let's learn how to communicate with people. Let's learn how to treat people as humans. Let's learn how to like create an environment that does feel safe. And that may actually mean, you know, like literally basics in how to talk to people.
Yeah, I would love to know what the panel thinks. Looking forward.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jakitra, you really reminded me of when we're talking about spaces, what type of space is that? Because a lot of times these corporations have spaces, right? But they look so performative, and then people don't want to be a part of those spaces and don't feel a sense of security or safety. I know I talk a lot about brave space and what that really means. So I think what you really described there is definitely like a brave space for people to be able to, like you said, come to the carpet, have that real conversation, right? And so, yeah, I appreciate what you described as what people would say, you know, a safe space, but talking about what type of space that really is so that it doesn't seem performative.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to jump in if I could. You know, I think there's also another caveat to that as well. When we want these spaces, we have to also make sure, I've seen where these spaces that we want, we close up and nobody can get into them. So if we don't offer and make sure that others know that, yes, this is maybe a niche or an area that we're closely connected to, but we also want you to ask questions. Sometimes there's a fear of not knowing how to get in, how to ask questions, how to not offend. So as much as we want to make sure that they understand us, others understand us, we want to make sure too that we're opening up an atmosphere that's inviting as well. It's really like a partnership, a two-way street, I feel.
And I have a comment that I want to add also, just based on my experience. Sometimes corporations may create the space to have uncomfortable dialogue, whether it's through hierarchical or departmental surveys around culture. And when you enter that space, you understand there's going to be some stuff that gets discussed that someone may not be comfortable with.
Right.
What I haven't seen is demographic data around race. You know, instead of breaking it down by departments or hierarchy, break it down by, you know, how do those who are BIPOC, how did they survey this question versus others? And is there something that we can do to bridge that gap so that it feels more like a community? And again, going into that conversation, you understand we're going to have some uncomfortable dialogue around a plethora of things.
I definitely want to get some more feedback. Alex, I'll have you jump in as well, because that idea of the brave space and performance. I'm going to just quickly say this. One of the reasons why I've always worked in DEI, right? And behind the scenes of cultural competency work with healthcare providers. But I never used to I'm not coming forward with this because I really thought that the whole DEI thing was a performative art. You know, companies just doing it when something happened in the news. You know, we're going to get a DEI director. We're going to establish these initiatives. So, Alex, I definitely want you to, as you give your answer, talk a little bit about this performative thing, this performance thing, and then Christy, just make a couple of comments on that brave space, right? Cultivating that. But this is me hosting these panels is taking a step forward to say it's the real work is more than performance, right? It's more than performative art.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. You know, I look back at this 2021 study by McKinsey and Company, right? And when we talk about performative, right, and we're looking at how do we show up as our brave and authentic space ourselves, right? And this is one of the pieces of our mission statement as far as the BIPOC Coach Collective goes. And yes, we're in the coaching space, but there's a lot of professional executive coaches in there, folks who are leading DEI initiatives and who are seeing the trend right now of things being kind of slashed away, right? Budgets being taken away, or it's members looking at, okay, I got to get my foot in the door somehow. So maybe this isn't really my space, but I got to get in here somehow, but it's not really who they are. Just going back to this study, right? When we talk about like leadership, we're talking about us elevating ourselves in these different spaces, not just Black folks, right? Asian, Latino, right? Is all encompassed. I'm speaking for myself because I'm a Black man, right? Only 8% of C-suite executives are in the US are people of color. Yeah. That's interesting. But what that screams to me is this lack of representation, right? Is opportunity of, well, we don't belong. There's no place for us. So do we tap dance, right? Kind of sambo our way into into that room, or do we get creative? Do we get collaborative and think about, all right, there's no space for us here. Can we build our own table? Can we have our own spot? And this doesn't mean like a segregated thing. This doesn't mean dismiss and leave people out, but looking at how can we pool our resources together and not come from a place of being inauthentic, because that robs us of our brilliance, and that also robs the other side of the opportunity to see the innovation, to see the true potential of what's possible. So that's where I'm coming from with that.
I'm definitely coming back to you on that, because with this challenge, I got to look up that fund. Y'all know what I'm talking about. The challenge in this fund that Black women are using to fund other entrepreneurs, and us trying to create spaces and places for ourselves. I definitely want to come back to that discussion. Kristy, let me let you make a comment, because the next question actually goes to Alex. Let you have the final comment regarding that first question.
Yeah, I believe definitely Shanandiss and Alex definitely talked about what a brave space is and how that's important in communities of color, particularly because, in a lot of times you are not allowed to bring your authentic self. And so creating that brave space and being intentional about naming that space and the purpose and allowing people to bring their thoughts, their emotions, their ideas to that space is super important to be able to feel that sense of belonging amongst the people in the community.
Well, the next question absolutely will come back to you, Alice, because I wanted to continue this discussion. I'm going to look up that fund while you answer this question, right? But as the vice president of the BIPOC Coach Collective, you've already kind of shared just a little bit about, how you have cultivated and created this space where it's not just Black people. Now, we as Black people, we know that we need places and spaces just for us, right? But we also know that this is not a one-man island, right? So what are some of the unique challenges, and I think you kind of pointed on those, that BIPOC professionals face in leadership roles, and how can they be supported to thrive in those positions? Again, we're looking for solutions that are not just a Band-Aid approach to trying to address DEI, right? So let me hand it over to Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Christy. And one of the things that comes to my mind is just exposure, just opportunity. When I'm doing coaching with this community, Black executive men, it's interesting to hear how many times one of them goes, well, I've never worked with a Black coach before. Like, what do you mean? Like, in my world, right, this is what I'm immersed in. There's so many, I can go throw a rock and find the 10, 15 coaches on LinkedIn that I'm connected with that are in my orbit, right? And I find it interesting that, like, going back to my earlier point, this lack of representation, what some of the other challenges that these professionals are facing is just simply bias and stereotyping. This is nothing new, right? This isn't like, oh my God, Black people are being discriminated against. Like, when did this happen? Like, open a book, open your eyes. This is what it is, right? So I put it like this example, where Black employees, they make about 12% of entry-level corporate jobs. Nothing wrong with that. But going back to the leadership side, only 7% of them are in management positions. So think of this like a restaurant. Hey, you can be the maitre d', you're a great waiter, you can be a great cook, you can even make it up to the chef, sous chef, but you being the owner, wait, maybe you should stay in your lane. Maybe that's a little too high for you, right? The sky's a little too up there. So my coaching approach and my vision is looking at how do we expand? I call it building a bigger bubble of influence, of expansive thought, of collective brilliance. And in leadership, you said the great thing, Christy, that there's no one-man island, right? Nothing great is built alone. So just the fact that us being on this call together, right, drafting off each other, bouncing ideas off, expressing and speaking out to the world, it's valuable. And I say this a lot, that our stories matter, our voices matter. So when we are a leader and you feel like, oh my goodness, I can't go to anybody, what if I'm going to get what I'm going to be placed as a token, what I'm going to be microaggressed against? If I'm not the smartest, if I'm not the elite, then that's going to raise some eyebrows of like, you know what, maybe you don't belong here. Maybe we were made a mistake of putting you in this leadership role. Maybe somebody else is more qualified. Maybe we'll pass you up on the next go around. And this pressure coming back to performance, like to be perfect, to be the best, to be elite, that's a lot of stress, because that switch doesn't turn off, right? I can be this in the office for 8-10 hours. And then when I go home, my mind is thinking, I got to perform. What if somebody else is working harder than me? What if someone's doing better than me? I have to ignore my kids, ignore my wife, ignore my partner, ignore my family, ignore my community, because I'm trying to fit in a box
Exactly.
That wasn't ever meant for me.
I'm gonna throw two things out to you guys, because we got another about 5 minutes on this conversation, right? So what I was trying to add to this is when we create some of those spaces, you have the Fearless Fund right now, which is being challenged, which is part of the reason why I'm doing this, right? Like when you already have a group, and Alex, you pointed out how we make about 12% of entry-level jobs, which is right on par because we make about 12 to 13% of the population in the United States. There is something called occupational segregation, right? And so we've been making jokes about Black jobs. And I think I said this on my LinkedIn, like, oh, well, you know, I'm a doctor. That's a Black job. That's cool, great. But statistically, right, there are, quote unquote, these jobs. And we should be asking ourselves, why is it 200 or 300 years after the end of slavery that we're still almost competing at the bottom with segregational occupation, right? There are some jobs that we're still being classified in as a Black community, speaking specifically as a Black community, that, you know, we should really be challenging those things that are, why are we not progressing in these occupational settings? It's like you said, Alice, you know, we may get to a certain level, right? But then people start to question, right? Why are we here? Or what are you doing? You're kind of getting out of your place. So I just wanted to throw that concept of what happens when we create these spaces and we find that they're being challenged, right? And then the other piece of that too is the reality that occupational segregation exists, so that we know that we can't do this as a standalone island. So let me let the group comment on that.
I want to jump in with that one. I remember, full transparency, I remember finishing up my PhD program, and I was one of 4 Black women who finished in leadership. Now, educational leadership is completely different. There's multiple Black women, as we know, in education, but leadership is completely different. And so, like, it was just as Alex is speaking of, like, it was one of 4 of us, one of 4. In the class before me, it was 2. And I remember experiencing so much bias. And I was like, what is this? Like, I was so stressed. I was gaining weight. And I just, like, literally was like, what's going on? And all my professors, as I continued to finish, were all males. Like, I even lost, like, the resemblance of me as a woman. I was like, okay, where are all the women at? Where are the women? And so I think it's one of those things that it starts even before we get out into the occupation. It starts in the school systems. This was me in PhD programs. Now think about what it looks like when it comes to communities and education, and like the people who are really getting into the schools that are supposed to be the best schools or the Ivy League schools, and where the discrimination starts there. And so I think it's like that root is nasty down there, and it's very uneven. And I think that plays a role as to, like, when you have a tough time in the communities, or the communities have like poor quality education, or the community is because of like equity issues in the BIPOC, you don't have the people going, or you wore them out on the way there. And I think
Can you guys speak a little bit more as a group to what Jakeisha was saying? I was trying to type it in the chat, but it's too good to type real quick, right? In terms of the compounded pressure and this stigma of perfectionism that not even just Black people, right? When I teach cultural competency classes, I talk about the Asian community and how they're considered the perfect minority. And I must also point out how they specifically selected members of the Asian community to challenge affirmative action, right? As this is used them as the perfect minority, and then once the case was overturned, moved on to what I'm speaking of with the fund that for the Fearless Fund. That was the next case that was being challenged by the same guy. I have to look him up. I consider him a dangerous man. But can you guys speak as a group to this ideology of perfectionism in minority and BIPOC communities?
Yes, so I agree 100% with Jakeisha. I was over here snapping my fingers. I like to say, in short, it's a conditioning that starts in school. To go to some of what's perceived as the better school means going to a school where the kids don't necessarily look how I look often. And then into high school, into college, and then you get into corporate America, and it's that same conditioning that just continues on.
You know, I also wanted to add, and I thought, thank you again, Jakeisha, those were some great points that you brought out. But some of this is also the culture that we grow up in, right? When I look at other cultures, and their cultures are they're driving forces for them. They're saving up money for college. They're sending them off to college with all that they have. We are still not necessarily doing that in our communities. Our community is still the lowest percentage, even though it's the highest it's ever been with higher education. We still are not putting education first. And so we already know that there's a rat race out there, that we already have to fight and compete with so many individuals to get to so many elements. But if we're not even putting ourselves in the race, and we don't have a culture and a community that's driving us towards that level of excellence. And now we're not even talking about college, because you're not prepared for college, because you don't have the culture that's helping you to understand that you need to get in these places. So to see more BIPOC people in places of leadership, we have to shift that culture to encourage and really put education as a priority. It's more than just getting a great job. It's also about critical thinking and all those other elements that we need in life that unfortunately our communities are not always pushing in the forefront, which makes it harder for us to cope with when we get into the real world sometimes.
And I would also add that ensuring that there's representation, right? And so that there are people who look like us in those roles, that gives us something to strive for. And this thing around perfectionism, right? We hear it time and time again. And, you know, from the people who love us dearly, very early on, that we have to work twice as hard, that we have to be twice as good. And so whether it's called perfectionism or not, I mean, it's something that we're fed from very early on, that we have to do more. We have to do more. We have to be better, just because that's the way that the world works for us. And it's not fair, but that's the realities of our lived experience. And so it's embedded, you know, in us. So we are striving, we are working harder, we are burning out, and representation matters. If there are no people that we can look up to, things have changed, but we still have a long way to go.
This is a fantastic conversation. I see some comments, and I just want to point out, because the next question goes to you, Kerry. Angel made a statement about, you know, not only this undue pressure, but that feeling of, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but we'll save that for the next conversation, in terms of feeling like you were selected as a token. And Angel spoke a little bit about that, and I appreciate the comments from Antoinette. I'm going to just keep going, and then Christy, you can jump in. Let me let Kerry answer this question and just keep the conversation going. So, Kerry, in your work, it integrates theory and practice, and you focus on driving organizational transformation. And so in your comments, just keep building on what you already said. Can you share an example of a successful initiative that promoted racial equity and cohesion within an organization, while still addressing some of these comments that just were made about this concept of tokenism and continuing that discussion on perfection, right?
Sure, absolutely. So one initiative that I have led that really made an impact was a mentoring and a sponsorship program for BIPOC employees. So we paired experienced leaders with up-and-coming talent, giving them structured guidance to help build relationships that went beyond the usual hierarchy and the verticals that people were hired into. We made sure that the mentors are not just focused on professional growth, but dedicated to fostering a inclusive environment grounded in psychological safety. So we've been talking a lot about safe and brave spaces at the top of this conversation, but creating psychological safety within organizations is really paramount for fostering an environment where individuals really do feel safe and secure enough to express their ideas, to take risks, and to challenge the status quo. I mean, it really requires cultivating mutual respect and openness. And oftentimes that's not often experienced in safe spaces. I mean, people talk about like these ground rules, but people actually feeling mutual respect and openness is not often always there. So ensuring that everyone's voice is heard and valued without fear of judgment or retaliation is really, really important. And so being able to encourage an honest dialogue and reinforcing the notions that mistakes are really opportunities for growth and not these I got you moments, or I knew they were not prepared, or I knew that we, pushed these people on. And these people meaning like BIPOC individuals or new talent or people who have not always been attached to the organization or grew up in the organization. That these really allow for innovative and collaboration very effectively. And leadership also really played a pivotal role in transforming these organizations. So the leaders also had to model vulnerability and being inclusive and actively inviting participation from people at all levels of the organization. And so we were able to prioritize psychological safety in the mentoring and sponsorship program. Like, mentoring is great and we love mentoring, but if you can't get these leaders to be your biggest cheerleaders when you're not in the room, or when they don't have to be accountable for the evaluations, like at the end of the year, they also have to sponsor you and hold you up when nobody else is looking, right? And it really helped to drive collective success and resilience. So the results were pretty amazing for this particular program. It wasn't just for BIPOC people, it was for everyone in the organization, because the up and coming talent, they had high levels of education. They had great experience for coming into the organization. They didn't want to be tokenized. They didn't want to come in and be like, well, we needed a special program to get ahead. They wanted to stand on their own. And so one of the other key ingredients that it was a program that was open for everyone, but it paid particular attention to the things that got in the way, the barriers that got in the way, that lived outside of the organization for BIPOC folks as well. But what I can tell you, the results were pretty amazing. Participation in the program boosted employee retention and collaboration for BIPOC folks and for the majority. It sparked conversations about racial equity that did not exist before, and it encouraged everyone to get involved in the important work. So it wasn't just about promoting diversity and inclusion. It was about changing the organization as a whole, changing the organization culture.
I'm sorry, because we got to keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
So Christy, let me let you jump in there, and then we'll keep the conversation going around those contexts. I think that was a great example.
Absolutely. And I'll just kind of speak to some of the things that Kerry talked about as far as mentorship and sponsorship, right? Everyone's talking about being an ally, right? Being an advocate for the people that are around you, for the people who come from backgrounds where they may not feel like they have a voice, right? And so what Kerry is talking about, this mentorship program, is a great example of having someone who has a voice to be able to mentor and speak to people who probably don't have that. But one concept that I learned earlier this year was about, especially for people in BIPOC communities, a lot of times we're seeking mentorship. We're looking for people who look like us, who talk like us, who have the exact same experiences as us. And so being open to hearing from people from various different backgrounds is all about what diversity and equity inclusion is all about. So being able to say, yes, I'm a Black queer woman, but I do want to hear from this Asian woman who's worked in this, field for this long. I do want to hear from her experiences, being able to be open to that. And so this idea of sponsorship, like you're saying, Kerry, is all about taking your allyship and advocacy to the next level, right? Saying, hey, you know what? I'm open to different perspectives. I'm open to hearing from this different lens, but I'm also open to being, to investing in someone. So, sponsors, the difference in an ally and a sponsor is someone who's really investing in that mentee, really investing in this person who might be from an underrepresented background, who might be BIPOC, who might not have those experiences, who might be entry level. So really being in those rooms, saying their names, putting them forward, being their letter of recommendation, being their reference, and really pouring into them, really pouring into those skills and those things that they need to be able to move forward in their career. So being a sponsor is very different than being an ally. Is you being on the forefront and you being the spokesperson for this person and really investing your time, talent, and energy into that person.
All All right, let me get some other comments from the chat. Somebody said, "What does BIPOC mean? Black, Indigenous, and people of color." Guys, I'm going to throw this book in the chat. It was written by Sylvia Ann Hewitt. I don't know if you guys read that book, but it's "Forget a Mentor, Find a Sponsor." I read that book at an HBCU retreat. It was written by a white woman in her 40s who came out of academia, right? And it's exactly to what Kristy and Kerry is saying. But I'm going to throw it out there for you guys to keep going on this conversation for 2 or 3 more minutes because it's so important.
Also, I agree with Kristy as well. I think it's so important to not get caught up in only needing to see you. There's other people that have so many different values. And oftentimes what I find is when programs have been created for just us, it's watered down. And I'm one of those individuals, just me personally. I want to be in the room with everybody. I want to know what everybody's knowing. Don't give me no side view with it. Don't give me a hamburger without no cheese. Give me what everybody's getting in that room. If I don't know it, I'll go look it up, dissect it, go get a definition for it. But oftentimes information is watered down based upon the perception of our intellect or ability to do. I don't want that conversation. So be comfortable being in the necessary rooms, getting the information, even if you don't see you in there. How do you get in those rooms? By you being in the room. Now somebody else can come into the room, but if we have the fear of even getting in the room, then guess what? Nobody's getting in the room and no one's getting invited in the room. So be comfortable being the only person to create room for everybody else.
I want to just make a quick point because, again, this was part of my own attitude transition, right? In the military, I was one of 4 Black women of 241 people who went in my class for officer training school. A lot of times I'm the only person at the table, usually the only woman, the only Black person at the table when it comes to leadership. And I used to, again, have this passe attitude about, well, I don't want to always be the only person at the table because I don't want to be a token. But the truth is I did the work to get there, right? And so in the last event that we had, I was talking to one of the young ladies offline, and she actually, I believe she said it during the event and talked about this. Somebody got to be the person at the table. And if it's not who, then if it's not me, then who, right? And so I think that as Black folks, people of color, period, right? Somebody got to be first. Let me let you guys make a comment, then we're going to move on to the next question.
I wanted to say something to that. In my other side of my profession as a professional counselor, that is something that's a big barrier, and it's something that wears down on a lot of people's psyche, is the whole minority stress and being the only person of color within the room and ignoring all the intersectionalities. And I say, still talk about that, still discuss that. And so it doesn't feel good and to go into a space and know that maybe I have been chosen because I'm a Black person or a woman or any of those particular intersectionalities. But the other part of the stressor is carrying the weight of silence. And so that doesn't help either. And so if that's what you're feeling and you're trying to perform in your work performance, you're not going to perform in your work performance. You're carrying anxiety along with that. And so which makes the environment even more toxic leadership. All those spaces get to be very uncomfortable and uneasy. The vibe is off. I don't want to go to work no more. We're bringing it home. All the things Alex was talking about too, the layers of layers. And so I think it's extremely important to identify that and to say it. Say it. And I think a lot of it is the resistance of what might be the consequences, which again begins to be more on the psychological side of things.
Anybody else before I move on to the next question? Because I'm busy trying to type notes to you guys, but I do want to. I want to absolutely say this. The next question is going to Tamuri. Let me let you guys make a comment first, and then let me move the question to Tamuri.
Well, to Keisha's point, right? Speaking up for ourselves and standing up for ourselves, this is kind of a new thing, right? If you look over the last 50, 60 years, right? If I, as a Black man, am educated and can speak and communicate well, that potentially was a death sentence not too long ago, right? I think about the Chris Rock joke, hey, you stop at that octagon thing. It's what do you mean octagon? You can read, right? So it's a joke. It's a funny thing there, but that's a real psychological condition thing of okay, I have to suppress my brilliance. And this is part of the reason why my organization, BIPOC Coach Collective, exists. Kristy Dinkins, your point earlier about we need mentorship. We need people who look like us and who can relate to us. Well, this is why we kind of assembled as Avengers of listen, there's so much available here. There's so much brilliance, collective brilliance here. And if people don't know, if people don't feel like they can go into a room where they can go home, where they feel like their family, it derails their work, right? Because I grew up in a space where I was some of the Shanandiss and Christy's experience, right? I grew up in primarily white Catholic schools, so maybe 2-3 faces of color in the room, but it's uncomfortable then. But it's actually a superpower for me now because I can go anywhere. I feel comfortable. I know the game already ahead of time, so I have the choice of either showing up as myself, strong, powerful, engaged, loving too. I'm not like revolutionary, but also recognize that I could show up that way, or I could shrink and passe and like, hey boss, like these are the games that we unfortunately have to play. But I invite you all who's watching, who's listening to this, what do you want to create? What's your real identity? Who do you want to show up as? Who do you want to show the world that you are?
Right. I love that. Shae, let me let you make a comment, but I'm just so heated by something Dr. Jakitra said that I got to just turn it over to Tamuri because I got to incorporate that in it because I'll come back. So Shae, let me let you have the last point on that.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that was discussed so far. Just making sure when we are in the rooms, we take that opportunity to, like Jakitra said, embrace, even if it is to be a token. Going back to what I said around using race as a data point when culture surveys or anonymous feedback surveys are something that when that data is collected, that is the time to use our voice, even if it is to be a quote unquote token, so that we can be heard and it's understood why departmentally, as a whole, it may feel like something different, but then when you break it down by race, it's a lot of gaps that need to be addressed.
So with that, I want to the next question is going to Tamuri, but I was so busy trying to just type y'all in the chat because there's something here about this delicate balance, right, that Jakitra said. So how do we address us trying to, like, I don't want to feel like a token. I was just hired because I was Black, but then the necessity of programs like affirmative action, right? If it wasn't something that was needed, it would have never been instituted. If we were getting hired based on equity, right? So in this question, in this next round of discussions, I'm going to shoot this first round out to tomorrow, but then that is the something I definitely want to address because we don't want to feel like tokenism. I don't want a job just because I'm Black, right? But at the same time, if there was hiring equity that existed, then that would have never had to been instituted. So Tamuri, as an international public speaker and mental health advocate, right? And we know that we all got two personalities. There's the corporate side, and then my mama sound like a totally different person when she answering the phone with me versus a voicemail, right? How do you address intersectionality of mental health and racial equity and your advocacy work? Because again, Jakitra pointed out the mental health issues, the challenge of that. But then in your answer in the next round of discussions, guys, let's talk about this debate over affirmative action a little bit and where we stand, right? Having to play these dual roles.
Well, I think most importantly that as a culture in the BIPOC community, none of the BIP or O or the C have done good acknowledging, accepting, recognizing, right? We're getting better in that space and place where mental illness is really a thing, and that we are really seeing that there are sometimes some legitimate imbalances. One of the things that I always do is I teach, coach, and speak and present for NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, and we help individuals with working and how to be able to communicate that you are living with something, how to have better balance in your life, how to be in an accepting environment. And sometimes that accepting environment is your culture, could be your mother, father, brother, sister, that doesn't acknowledge that there is a thing called mental illness, that there is anxiety that most BIPOC people are plagued with just getting in your car and driving to the corner store. That's a real thing, that PTSD really does exist. And based upon where you've lived and what you deal with, we deal often with PTSD in neighborhoods of violence, but PTSD can be listening to your mom and daddy argue all the time, being in a toxic environment, hearing domestic violence, or being in a family culture that is stricken with toxicity. So acknowledging those things and really knowing how they've affected our lives personally allow us to have the courage to go into workspaces or to be able to go and have those conversations of things that I live with and why I might need additional support. breaking the stigma on that. I tell people all the time how very natural it is. I don't like to use the word normal, that we are all trying to digest something. I live with anxiety, PTSD, and clinical depression. And those are things that I navigate. I tell people that my anxiety is my superpower. It is no longer the thing that has me clammy. It is the thing that prevents me from slapping somebody often, that tells me this is not a good situation. It is often the thing that tells me that I need to go in a different direction, have a different type of conversation. So it's the something that helps to guide me to keep my sanity in place. And so often trying to let people know, listen to your inner self, what that looks like. Who's in your circle? Do you have toxicity in your circle of friends? Is it in your home? Is it in your workplace? And how do you navigate removing that in order to have a much more balanced life? It is difficult and complicated being Black in America. And a lot of people don't understand that. And I often tell people of non-Black or African descent that it is difficult navigating being Black in America, but it doesn't have to be crippling. It doesn't have to be the thing that prevents you from being as great as possible. So it is, mental health is my absolute passion. It's been the thing that has at some point come in and been a wrecking ball, but it's also been the something that I've been able to give to people to help support their journey of mental sobriety is what I call it. So,
Wow.
You know, one of the things that I often talk about in my work, we talk about post-traumatic, and I often get people to embrace is persistent. So there's nothing post about it. I mean, we live and move and hold it every day. And that was a great example of you talking about it as your superpower, just dealing with it in the moment, that it is persistent, that it is alive, and it is real. And sometimes the people that we spend most of our time with discount it as not being strong enough, not being flexible enough, or being weak, and being too sensitive. So I really appreciate all the work that you are doing and bringing the awareness to folks.
Any other comments on that? And I still want to address the issue of this dual balance and dual role that we play, right? So we got about 2 minutes left in this portion of the conversation. So how do we balance that? Like, there's this need for us for people who sponsor us in these positions, i.e. affirmative action, right? But yet there's this duality that exists when we talk about mental health and playing these dual roles.
I mean, I think we play dual roles in everything that we do. And we have to have the work voice, we have to have the outside voice. We go into corporate America, we have to act one way. There was always a concept, I still think it's a concept now, that when you go into a job interview, you don't go with braids, you don't go with ethnic hair, because you're sure to lose the job. So, here is my thought process. These are ugly, ugly realities of our world. And when I was working in corporate America, my goal was always to get the job, because no matter how I got it or what you thought about me, I was going to go in there and crush it. I was going to go in there and kill it. If I'm going into a boardroom and I'm the only Black person, you will know that I'm there. You will know why I am there by the time I leave. You probably will want me to leave by the time I leave. But nonetheless, the reality is sometimes the circumstance is the circumstance. What you do with that opportunity in that circumstance, I'll be your token all day, but I'm going to go in there and I'm going to knock it out of the box and create an opportunity for someone when I leave that room that door is open. So that's a lot of weight to carry on us. And it's a burden sometimes, but heavy is the head. That is our reality until it changes. How do we navigate that? And how do we not allow that to destroy us? But it can be a real thing. But this is the world that we live in. Our community has to now start thinking about, how do we support each other better? Because sometimes that's that one person, only one of us can make it. And I've decided it's me, so I have to help it be harder for you. How do we come behind each other and support so that no longer is a thing? That's what we need to do. I don't look for others to do it. I look for us to love and support us better. Are we doing it? So when I walk in that room, even if I'm the only one, I know when I come out, I got a village of people that got my back. We have not gotten there yet. That's where we need to get to.
Amazing. Amazing. Let me throw this last question out to Shae, because you got a fantastic story that I hope you incorporate into this. And we're just going to round out this, and we'll end the initial conversation about 10:52, right? So about 7-minute discussion. So Shae, let me get your initial 90-second, 2-minute answer on this, and then I'm looking forward to you guys just throwing out every piece of what you got as we close this out. So Shae, you got not only a rich professional background, but you have rich personal experience in this context, right? And so when we talk about entrepreneurship, how you live your life personally, because I don't want to tell you a story, but it just made me so excited. All right, and empowering BIPOC communities and fostering inclusive environments. Let me just throw that out there to you, Shae, and then I'm looking forward to the rest of this conversation.
Yeah, so with being an entrepreneur and then also personally as a chosen parent to my children, there's a lot of alignment. And over time, I've learned to understand what those alignments are. I think we can all agree that parenting is tough. And then also being an entrepreneur is tough. And you have surface level understanding of what you are walking into. Well, personally, I started off as a foster parent before becoming a parent. And when you sign up to foster, the first thing that happens is, you do an assessment. They find out whether or not your home is ready. You're mentally able and capable to be a mentor or an authority figure in this child's life. And then, of course, over time, that grows to love. It's very similar to entrepreneurship. You sign up to do something, and then eventually you figure out, hey, it's a lot of stuff happening, a lot of barriers taking place, but then you grow to love and overcome those barriers. For my life, my son is white. So him growing up with a black family, we've had to have a lot of serious discussions and just authentic conversations with him being only 12 years old right now. And so those conversations started early.
So I want to talk a little bit too. We talk about this context of adoption, fostering, whether it's fostering resilient environments in the workplace, fostering resilient environments in the community, this concept of entrepreneurship, the lack of wealth in some of our communities when it comes to entrepreneurship, the mentality. I mean, there's so much in this context. Let me get some organic conversation going. Any comments from our panelists regarding Shae's experience and even what you experience as entrepreneurs and in the workplace?
I want to comment on that, Shanandiss. I'm super proud of you for adopting into the intersectionalities. I have a very good dear friend, very similar, Black male, LGBTQ population, adopted white son. And so he had to actually have a conversation too. And I find that interesting because as I'm raising my Black son, I'm not having a conversation about that particular intersectionality. And I think sometimes that's what we need to think about. Like, that's affirmative action. That's all those things. I'm having a conversation about him being a Black son, of course, based on everything that's happening as he grows taller, all the things. But when we dive into those intersectionalities, it really dives into the mental health piece. And that is where the harm is. The psychological barriers has always, to me, been the game player. Like, that's where everybody's played the game with us, like brown paper bag experiment, all those things there. And like, that goes back so much generationally that's where it's so unsafe to speak up. That's where it's so unsafe to like be yourself in these spaces. Like, that's where it feels consequential because we got poverty issues, security issues, safety, emotional safety, all those barriers that are in place. And I think that does play a role. It's like, man, we're in our home and we're having to have a talk at dinner about like the harm. And like, someone's going to look at you and be like, is that really your mom? Is that really your dad? Like, you got two dads, right? You got two moms, right? Like, those particular areas. And it's like, yeah, I'm having this with my 5-year-old. Like, the unfairness, and again, the need for DEI, like, just, yeah.
I love this conversation because when you see this all Black panel, right, and we discussing all of these things, the concept of intersectionality, like, nope. When you adopt a child, you're adopting that child out of love, right?
Yep.
And so the color doesn't matter, but yet you're adopting a child out of love. We're still dealing with all of these things in the workplace, and then on top of that, you have to deal with the assumptions of, you the nanny. So let me have Alex to chime in on this conversation, this discussion about intersectionality, and then I just want to hear a couple more comments on you guys' just general experience as entrepreneurs as well.
Yeah, this is a very interesting one because for myself in my home, I'm an interracial marriage. My wife is of Spanish and white descent, so our kids obviously being mixed, and they have the best of both worlds in that context. And at the end of the day, what I have done is imploring them is look at just basic human values, right? Of like, hey, be respectful of people, right? The golden rule, right? Treat us how you want to be treated. Speak up when you need to, right? If something's uncomfortable, if something doesn't feel right, you have a voice. You don't need to muffle it or muzzle it or shrink, right? I come back to this example of building a bigger bubble, of like expanding your thought process of watching success, of watching different clues. Like we watch Shark Tank, and they love it as entertaining, but now they start to look at it like, oh, you know what, this thing isn't as valuable, right? They're having a different eyesight of it. I want them to have that piece of the entrepreneur mind, because when you're able to create, when you're able to build something, when you're able to enroll other people into a big enough idea, a big enough vision, it breaks these barriers down, right? Just yesterday, right? Just as in real time, my son had one of his neighborhood friends come over. This kid's a white kid, redhead, gingerhead kid, but they're playing like it's nothing. They're just having fun, like they're like little brothers to each other. And it's a beautiful thing for me. I love watching that. And the pain also is inside of me of like, oh my goodness, what happens one day when they start to see each other as separate? Like, oh, well, he's this and he's that. Like my daughter's had that. She's about to be in high school, and she had an experience of someone be like, well, you're not really black. Like you're like light skinned. Like, what does that mean? Like, right. What does the color have to do with who she is internally, or how she identifies herself and how she carries herself? So it's an interesting balance. It's an interesting dynamic, I should say. And I think for us, whether we're parents, we're caregivers, we're guardians, people of influence, leaders, it's important for us to look at that person, because that's for what I'll speak for myself. That's what I always wanted. I always wanted someone to see me as human, not just black man. Yes, it's important, right? This is the most important part of me, but I'm also a man. Like, am I not a man and a brother? Right? Go back to that old picture. So when we can start to see each other as that, then we can be that.
All right, we got time for one more comment, and then we're going to do it around the room. I could go another 2 hours with y'all on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think intersection and parenting and entrepreneurship is quite interesting. For me, I'm a parent, and I have 21-year gap between my older set of children and my younger set of children, and so age in parenting plays a pretty different role in the assumptions of younger parents and older parents, and the change in parenting across the years past. I mean, I started my consulting practice to have better balance with my younger children that I didn't have with my older children. And so it all plays and marries differently, together. And, it all matters, in the end. It's a delicate balance in the intersection of identities and the choices that we make for work and how we work and live.
Thank you so much. Now, look, I could go another 2 hours with you guys, but we are getting close to that hour. I saw that Shae, that you wanted to make a final comment. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to start the around the room. And so I want you to give your final comment, right? Give me your 60-second plug and whatever final comment you wanted to make. But then also just let people know where they can find you. So we'll start with Shae, and then we'll go around the room.
Yeah, so within my question, part of it said fostering, and I thought that was very tactful, fostering inclusive environments, and it starts at home. So as a before foster parent, and now I have adopted my son, the level of commitment and foundation shifts, because as a foster parent, you have the understanding that this child may or may not stay with you. But when you make a decision or a commitment to adopt, and now you're signing birth certificates, that level of commitment and foundation and accountability changes. And now within the environment or within the home, that's where it starts. So fostering an inclusive environment really starts at home. And it's not just about what I'm teaching or what I'm doing for myself as a Black queer woman, but him as a white heterosexual male. We are having conversations and living experiences that are difficult to really teach. And it all starts with the conversation. It all starts at home. So inclusivity starts in the home for the environment.
So Shae, go ahead and where can folks find you, connect with you?
Yep. So you can find me on LinkedIn, just looking up Shanandiss Hampton, or Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Shakespeare.com. Yep, you pulled it up. So I also have a book, and if you go to Shakespeare.com, you can purchase the book there.
Thank you so much. Fantastic conversation. I'm gonna keep going. Tamuri, what are your final thoughts, and where can people find you?
Definitely, entrepreneurship is really the backbone of this country. It always has been. And I think one of the most important things is that we can get support, education, and knowledge from anywhere. I think what Shae is doing will be the thing that helps to change the world. When you raise someone from another culture, they get an opportunity to have a peek really into that culture and be a part of the change. You can find me on www.TamuriRichardson.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and Instagram under Tamuri Richardson, and please reach out.
Yeah, and what I love about this conversation and the way that it ended with Shae's story is you come to a discussion like this and you think that, especially with an all-Black panel, you think that we exist in a monolith, right? But you have Alex, who's in a biracial relationship. You have Shae, who's adopted a white child. So it's just, our stories as Black people are not a monolith. Like, we advocate for this stuff. Let me be quiet because I know we only got a few minutes left. We advocate for this level of equity, right? But our story itself is a cohesive advocation of equity. But our individual stories is not a monolith. We still live individual in lives. Kerry, let me get your final comments.
Yes, we must celebrate the achievements and contributions of BIPOC people and create environments where they feel valued and, most importantly, respected. So committed, forward-thinking organizations and leaders don't have to do this work alone. K&B Consultancy will partner with you to take decisive steps towards building equitable spaces and amplifying your impact. You can find us at kerrymitchellbrown.com, and you can follow us on all social media platforms at Dr. Kerry M. Brown. Thank you for having me as part of this conversation.
Thank you. Amazing. Jaketra?
Yes. Thank you so much for the amazing conversation. Something I want to leave everyone is it's okay to be yourself, like in all spaces. And so I know I say that very lightly, and I know how challenging it really is, but it's the real you that's really needed in the space. And that's you in all the intersectionalities. And that's something I found every time I go speak. The more I show up as myself, the more interpersonal conversations I have where people really are connected, waiting on me to be there. And so wherever you are, you're meant to be in that space. And so, but it's also okay to get mental health support when it's very taxing on you. And so I want to encourage people to do just that. And so I can be found at Dr. Jaketra Bryant on my LinkedIn page, Dr. Jaketra Bryant _ on like Instagram. And then I'm also like always traveling and speaking around. So my next one is Savannah. So maybe catch me in one of my minority stress talks and toxic leadership talks.
All right. And Alex, final comments from you, then we'll go to Christy.
Yeah, for sure. This has been such a beautiful conversation. So, I want to just thank and acknowledge you all for being a part of this. Those who have watched, who've been engaging, thank you as well. And you've heard me say this before, that I want you to really anchor into this, that your voice matters and your story matters. And to echo Jaketra, right? Wherever you are, you belong. And there is no separation from you and me, right? We all come from the spiritual place. I'm going to take you to church for a minute, right? Call it God, universe, spirit, source, Gus. If you want to just put into one, we all come from one place, and we're all here trying to do the same thing. We're trying to live a great life. We're trying to live an abundant life. We're trying to live a life of peace and harmony. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn on Alex Dumas, where you can find me, and my community of coaches, BIPOCCC.org. And we'd love to be connected with you and support you and serve.
And Christy, let me give you the last 30 seconds here to close this out.
I'm going to just talk about what Tamuri talked about earlier, which was shifting the culture of BIPOC communities. And that's through our lived experiences, through intersectionality, through our mental health, through personal life and professional experiences. And you all can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Kristy Dinkins, and you can also find me as Kristy Yvonne on Instagram and Facebook.
Thank you, guys. This has been a fantastic conversation. We're going to throw information about work solutions also in the chat. Just published a book, the REBT DEI Framework. And this was fantastic. We look forward to our end of year conversation. Thank you for everybody who attended. And we're looking forward to our conversation next month where we'll focus on women and DEI. Thank you.